afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the June 9th, 2009 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have the roll call, please?
Authority members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the June 9th, 2009 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, June 4th, 2009 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. The next item?
Next item is approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
If there's no objections or corrections, the minutes will be approved as submitted. Next item.
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. And the matter may be referred to staff through Executive Director for investigation and report.
I have a card from Herbert Milano. Mr. Milano, once, twice. Not appearing.
Here.
Let's move on to the next item, please. I'll close oral communications.
Next item on the business agenda at 6A is Interim Acting Director of Community Development and Housing regarding development of an affordable home ownership project to be located at 624 to 630 Geneva Street. 6A1 is a motion authorizing an exclusive negotiating agreement with San Gabriel Valley Habitat for Humanity, Inc. in preparation for a disposition and development agreement.
Mr. McFall.
We'll go right to Jess for this report.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to go directly to Peter Zovak, Deputy Director of Housing.
Well, it has a quick pass now.
Round the horn.
I'd like to turn it over to Mike Fortney, the Housing Project Manager. Mr. Chair, members of the Authority, previously the Housing Authority authorized Community Development and Housing staff to enter into preliminary discussions with San Gabriel Valley Habitat for Humanity for a proposed development of a small-scale affordable home ownership project for low-income households on 3 parcels owned by the Housing Authority located at 624 through 630 Geneva Street. Habitat is a local nonprofit organization committed to providing decent, affordable homeownership housing for low-income families on a no-profit, no-interest basis. Habitat's able to develop housing for this income group due to their unique operating, which is low overhead of operation, both at a office level and a construction level through the use of dedicated volunteers. The households selected for Habitat projects eventually become partners in the project. They are now required to provide their own labor towards the construction of their homes through 500 hours of sweat equity. Habitat has completed 5 homeownership projects in Glendale, totaling 18 units. They're currently in construction on their 6th project, which is the 11-unit Kenwood project. That's slated for completion around March of 2010. The parcels at the 624 through 630 Geneva location were acquired by the Authority in 2006 at a cost of $2.5 million. The site consists of 3 separate but adjacent parcels totaling 16,128 square feet. Based upon preliminary discussions, Habitat has proposed to develop 5 attached condominium dwelling units. Each unit will have 3 bedrooms and 1.5 baths. The homes will measure approximately 1,250 square feet and are to be 2-story wood frame construction. Preliminary estimates provided by Habitat project total development costs at approximately $3.4 million. It does seem high, but 2.5 of that represents the land acquisition cost at the Authority when they purchased the property, and the remaining approximate $900,000 represents a development cost that Habitat foresees in constructing the project. Preliminary site plans for the proposal calls for the development of a portion of the parcel, approximately 10,000 square feet. It's considered the southern most portion of the property. With this 5-unit proposal, it will leave what we're calling for now a remnant parcel, approximately 42 street frontage feet, and the parcel is approximately 144 feet deep. So approximately a 6,000 square foot parcel will be left as a remnant parcel that the Authority, either now through some discussion or direction or at a later time, can decide on how to dispose of that and develop it in the future. At this time, staff has prepared an E&A for Housing Authority review and approval. The purpose of the E&A is to authorize staff to negotiate formally on the terms and conditions of a disposition development agreement. The ENA establishes certain performance standards that must be achieved in order to be ready for a DDA execution, and that would be performance standards both for community development and housing staff and for Habitat. The term of the ENA is for 14 months. It does seem a little bit long, but there are reasons for that. This extended time frame will allow Habitat to complete construction of the Kenwood project. It will allow them to fully prepare and review development plans for the proposed project and market the project both locally and regionally in order to raise sufficient funding to initiate and complete construction. If you recall, on every Habitat project, we've required that Habitat raise a certain amount of cash in order to start construction on the project. And that's really to ensure that they're able to initiate construction and maintain that momentum and not really have a time where they stop construction and try and fundraise again. Over the course of all the projects, those numbers have varied. The very first project, or actually I take that back, the second project was required to raise $200,000. The Kenwood project was required to raise $1.1 million. After discussing it with Habitat, we've agreed that the amount of cash required to be raised by them in order to start construction and have a DDA executed is $400,000. At this time, there are no fiscal impacts associated with the execution of the ENA. During the period of this 14 months, the period of the ENA, the Housing Authority will retain ownership and title to the property. And we do have representatives of Habitat here. We have the Executive Director, Sonia Yates. We have the architect, Vicki Barbieri of the Heritage Group. And we also have a couple of board members as well as committee members. So if there are no questions of staff, I'll ask that Sonia Yates say a few words.
Questions? Member Draymond?
Raymond, that's my...
I don't know if I call you member or director or
Hey, you.
council member.
Mr. Chair, unless I am mistaken, we actually voted related to this remnant parcel that we're describing. And it was picked up as a headline in the Glendale News Press the next day. We were discussing this remnant parcel, but by the time that agendized meeting was over, there were 3 remnant or unused parcels that were being looked at for the purpose of community gardens. I noticed that this particular presentation differs a little bit from what is in our packet, in that in our packet, if I'm looking at the same one, it's just simply referred to as a remnant parcel. In this packet, it's referred to as a proposed future street improvement / community garden. So what the reason I'm raising it is if we could check that out, check back with the record and make sure of what we had actually done at that previous meeting at that time.
Okay.
In terms of that vote.
Well, as I remember, we absolutely are interested in pursuing the community garden there. There's certainly enough room. The proposed street is just that, proposed. Lots of things have to fall into place. It'll be a long time, so I think the staff just needs to start planning on the community gardens aspect of the remnant.
Very good. Well, housing staff would, I'm sorry. I was going to say housing staff would work with the city attorney staff to go ahead and pursue that.
Mr. Weaver?
We definitely said community gardens.
We voted yes, we did.
If I may, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, we will look at that to see if we had I'm certain there was a discussion about whether to use that as a community garden, at least in the short term, or whether it would be a future road improvement. I'm not sure if there's any specific vote, but if you have that recollection, we'll certainly look and try to follow
Mr. Chair,
that.
there was a vote. It was the same evening that we settled on the one on Monterey that is actually close to completion. And where we thought we'd be talking about one, we ended up with 3 locations that were settled on. Now, what the legalities are is a different issue. And as I mentioned, the newspaper could have easily gotten it wrong just as well. However, that was their headline the next day as well, that we had settled on 3. But regardless of that, can we check back to that, double check it, and see where we are with it? In any case, this was the original site we were talking about. and it morphed into several other permutations and other locations. The site that was given the green light first was the Monterey site. This was the original site we were talking about, however. And so, in any case, if my recollection and the recollection of others on the dais is incorrect, then you can be sure I'll be asking to agendize that.
Okay, and let's just be clear. In any event, this 40-some foot, or actually more than 40 foot,
50 foot?
Approximately 42 feet.
is going to remain undeveloped.
Correct. This
So
is
they will
not,
not be
this,
cited
this
on-
remnant parcel, future street frontage, or whatever other use, community garden, is not part of the E&A. We've separated that from the proposal with Habitat.
Okay. So unless we're going to put in a bowling alley or something, I think
Lawn bowling.
first we'll check and make sure that your recollections are correct. And I was more tuned into the Monterey locations, and this very well may have been the...
Actually, Mr. Chair, and the reason I raise it, and let me just be very frank, is this particular property was the subject of some continuing discussion, and it was the impression of this authority member that there was some opposition to using this site that was unspecified and kept coming back and back, and each time we talked about this site, what come back is a different site. And that's the evolution of the discussion outside of this, those were discussions with staff. So you can imagine my concern when I sit on the dais now and look at this and see that it is listed as a remnant parcel and nothing else in the report, but in this printed presentation, it's listed as potentially as a community garden or a proposed future street improvement. So I'm just requesting that we go back to see what we did and get it on the record one way or the other.
We will definitely do that, and if in fact it does require some additional legal, we don't need to receive further direction. We've received the direction. If there was something that needed to be done, agendized, we'll just bring that back to council. But we'll review the record first.
And I should clarify, Housing Authority Member Draymond, the renderings as part of the staff report was prepared by staff. And you're correct in that previous discussions on a community garden, we had those discussions with Habitat and possibly having Habitat retain some type of ownership to that title and then subleasing it out. So when they prepared those last-minute elevations that was handed to staff prior to the meeting, they didn't know what to call it, and so they elected to label it that way. So that explains how that happened.
For the record, Mr. Chair, I call it a community garden, and hopefully that is where it's going, seeing as that was the discussion pretty much since 2007. So,
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Would someone from Habitat like to address the authority?
It's good to be here with you again, and I want to thank each one of you for your confidence in Habitat for Humanity locally.
Introduce yourself again to the
Yeah,
viewing
sure.
public.
I'm
so we know.
Sonia Yates, the Executive Director for San Gabriel Valley Habitat, and coming with me is Mike Davitt. Now, you probably know him. Many of you greeted him warmly because he's been associated with the city of Glendale before, and his father, of course, had an esteemed record with the community college. We're fortunate to have him serving as the secretary for our organization, and I'd like to turn the mic over to him so that he can bring you greetings from our board.
Thank you, Sonia. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Habitat for Humanity, I would like to thank the Housing Authority and the City of Glendale for their past support of our organization. Our relationship over the years with the city has been excellent. We appreciate that. Our jurisdiction is throughout the entire San Gabriel Valley, and we would hope and wish that our relationship with other cities is as good as the city of Glendale. So we're very appreciative of that. Also very appreciative of staff work, Peter, Jess, my old boss. And so we're pleased with them and their support of that as well. So on behalf of Habitat, thank you very much. We're very excited about the Geneva project, and we're going to get that Kenwood project finished soon, and we're going to carry on with Geneva. So thank you all very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Questions?
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
I want also to recognize in the audience a person who has agreed to be the campaign chair for the Geneva campaign, and that's another individual you know, Elaine Wilkerson. So, Elaine, thank you so much for volunteering to step up and meet this need. We're very optimistic because those of you who know her know that she really gets things done. So, the invitation is now in effect. People can write their checks and send them on over to Habitat for the Geneva project. Assisting Elaine is Amy Borton, our ecumenical outreach Vista, who will be working with places of worship in the city of Glendale, again to involve that very important constituency in the Geneva build. So with that, do you want to turn it over to Vicki for further presentation? Vicki Barbieri. We always appreciate the fine work that Vicki does in conceptualizing affordable housing in a way that Glendale can be proud of it.
Good afternoon. My name is Vicki Barbieri. I'm the architect for the Heritage Group and always with the board presenting the Habitat for Humanity projects. I didn't mean to confuse anybody when we labeled that independent piece of land that we are not using at all for our project. We are not counting in it for any purpose whatsoever. And I didn't mean to confuse anyway in reference to the use. I have no idea what the use is going to be, and the land is free to be wherever it is you decide to be. The project in itself survives with all the codes and regulations in the piece of land that we've been assigned to use. I think it's a little bit small board this time. This is what
Just a moment.
Mike.
I prepare, I think, 7 little booklets where we show the same renderings and the most important elevations that are the streets over Geneva and what that piece of land, wherever it's going to be in the future, called. But this is really the most important elevations. Due to the constraints of the labor and material that Habitat for Humanity present to the designers, we always think that the craftsman style is the most accessible style for that kind of product. Materials always kind of similar, asphalt shingles, vinyl windows, different type of sizes of siding, but always siding, but that help and comply with the kind of use that the labor that is provided can execute. We are very proud with the little project that came along. I think if you look at the 3D, I think it's very much part, and you can see what the finished product will be, very much part of the street, of the neighborhood. It's like, has belonged there, and this is what we always try to do. In reference to colors, we selected colors of the same style, very traditional, very livable with the style. I don't really have too much to say. If somebody has a question, I'd be able to answer it, but I don't think I have too much to
Ms.
say.
Barbieri?
Excuse me?
I said, are there any questions for Ms. Barbieri? Okay. If not,
Thank you so much.
something may come up, but if not.
I'll be here. I won't escape. I promise. Thank you.
Okay. All right, any comments? Mr. Quintero?
Well, I want to start by thanking Habitat for Humanity for their interest in Glendale. From the time they built the first project in this city, which is still in very good shape, I might add, they've just done a wonderful, wonderful job. And I've been monitoring the progress on the latest project. It's amazing how quickly it's gone up. But I think this is a great project. The location is excellent. We'll tie it in with the community gardens that perhaps some of these very homeowners will be able to participate in. But and for those people who don't know, and basically people watching at home, Habitat for Humanity, the key there, and what really interests me, is that the individual homeowners build their units. And so you actually see them contributing their sweat equity. And what's also interesting is how many other people who have lived and continue to live in Habitat for Humanity projects come to help the new homeowners. So I literally see faces that I remember from 5 and 6 and 8 years ago. So it's just a wonderful organization. You've done a tremendous job here in Glendale. It's very efficient financially for the Housing Authority. We have a mixed portfolio. We have senior housing and rentals, et cetera, but this always, the Habitat for Humanity projects always come in at a very, very excellent price. So it's just a win-win for everyone. So we have to pitch in with our goal of $400,000. I'm sure that Elaine Wilkerson will reach that goal in no time, because that's the type of person with energy to get it going. She's grabbing her brow as I speak, but I want to thank you, Elaine, for getting involved with this project. So I'm a big supporter, and I'm looking forward to turning the first shovel and watching the first families move into their new homes.
Mr. Mincy.
We have such a good relationship with Habitat. I was mentioning to Sonia, when you go to these ribbon cuttings and see those happy faces of people that finally have a home and one that they can be proud of, just makes everybody feel good. We've had such a good relationship with all 6 projects so far, and I would like to move 6A1.
Second.
Well, is there any other discussion? Mr. Draymond.
Better be on mic before I'm on record, huh? It's an incredibly good design. It's a wonderful design, and it's exactly as you say, Ms. Barbieri. It looks like it. Well, it doesn't just look like it. It is. It fits right into the neighborhood. It is a part of the neighborhood like any other home would be. It's terrific. As a matter of fact, this project kind of makes our street work here look a little lacking, actually, with the street in front that is in need of a little bit of care. However, first the important thing, a place for people to live. Anyway, this is terrific, and thank you again, and thank you, Elaine, for your task you're about to take on. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
All I can say is I hope that more of these opportunities arise in the future, because giving people the pride and ownership or being able to live there with off-street parking in the city today, it's a great thing. So I know there'll be more opportunities. It's about one of the most worthwhile things we do as a housing authority. It's a great design.
I have a couple questions for Mr. Duran. The recommendation is for approval, is that correct?
Of the ENA, correct.
Of the ENA. And let me first say I'm a big supporter of Habitat. They've done great projects throughout. There was no hesitation, perhaps, to put this out to an RFP. Sometimes we get projects, in all fairness, where there are proposals made, and staff's objection is that, well, we should put this to an RFP and let everyone else take a shot at it. So can you just elaborate the criteria that you use to not let the throwing it to the open market come into play and recommend that we go into an ENA?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll let Mr. Zovak give you that background.
Yes, one big factor in this project is that it's funded with redevelopment set-aside funds. Federal funds, and particularly Housing Authority deals with the use of home funds, do look at the aspect of some type of RFP process and affirmative marketing and affirmative selection of developers. Redevelopment set-aside funds doesn't necessarily require that. And as mentioned in the staff report, the previous direction provided by the Housing Authority was to pursue this particular project proposal with Habitat.
Let me ask another question. If we were to, sometimes when projects come to the authority, staff scrutinizes the per unit subsidy of the authority. What would the per unit subsidy be in this?
The per unit subsidy in this project is, at this point, is the Housing Authority's cost to acquire the land, which is the $2.5 million.
For 5 units?
For 5 units of low-income home ownership.
So that's about $500,000 a unit.
Correct.
And my colleagues may remember that many times when other developers come to us with subsidies, 150, 180, 200, eyebrows are raised and questions are put forth, well, that's too much, why can't they trim it a little bit more? So how would you explain that? Am I comparing apples to oranges, or?
Somewhat, yes. You have to look at the sources of other funds that could be brought in and leveraged with the project and the requirements of those sources. In this particular case, Habitat is really the leading developer when it comes to a home ownership product for low-income individuals. Typically, any other developer would ask for a much higher subsidy above and beyond the land to develop a low-income homeownership project. And as we stated in the report, Habitat is able to do that through their unique operating and their use of volunteers to make that happen. And let me just go back to say that the overall Housing Authority's investment is $2.5 million, approximately $500,000 per unit, of which $110,000 will be placed on each home as a silent second and eventually recaptured by the authority, with some share of appreciation if the units are sold prior to the end of the 45-year affordability term.
Okay. And I'm just asking these not to cast any doubt on the Habitat project, but just to remind my colleagues that there are projects that come before us that are much lower in terms of the per unit subsidy, and there are projects where staff recommends that we not conduct so many projects with a particular developer, and staff recommends that we go out for, or authority also says, well, let's go out for an RFP. And my point is that it is certainly acceptable to make sure that you're dealing with a proven developer such as Habitat, a proven course of construction who has given us many solid units over the past 10, 15 years.
Correct.
So let's keep that all in mind as an authority as we vote on projects in the future and analyze them as well.
And I would just say, though, to the degree that we could, we do that. The source of, or the group that governs the use of home funds, though, is HUD. And that has been one of their comments they have made in previous visits to Glendale with regards to marketing and RFP process.
Yes, Councilmember.
Is Habitat for Humanity a nonprofit?
Yes.
And how many of the other developers that work with the city, how many of those are nonprofits?
I would say less than half of them are. They are usually for-profits that then connect with a nonprofit entity, depending upon the other funding sources that they're going after.
Thank you.
I think the key for me, always supporting Habitat, is a sort of community aspect of it. Number one, that the individual homeowners will have worked on those projects. I forget how many hours. What's the minimum?
500 hours.
Yeah. So I've seen them do everything from foundations to finishing, drywall, etc. And then the fact that Disney, other private for-profit City of Glendale employees also support the projects and get involved in the building. So for me, that's the key to Habitat. I only wish we had more land that would offer the opportunity for people to participate.
Yes, Agency Member Parazian.
It is really joy to have Habitat for Humanity every time when he comes to Glendale, and we're having great projects, and I believe the community should be appreciative and be happy the job they're doing. And thank you guys. Thank you for your...
Okay, we have, if there's no other comments, we have a motion and a second. We'll take roll, please.
Authority members Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Mincy,
Yes.
Parazian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Najarian.
Yes. Thank you. Congratulations. Let's go to the next item, please. 6B.
At 6B is Interim Director of Community Development and Housing regarding 2008-2009 Winter Shelter Program Year-End Report. At B1 is a motion acknowledging receipt of report, including exhibits, and providing direction to staff.
Okay, Mr. McFall.
Yes, Jess Duran actually will make this report this time.
Bob, Chairman Najarian, members of the Housing Authority, we are here as a follow-up to a request made by the Housing Authority members to provide a status report on the Winter Shelter Program. As many of you know, we closed out last year's on March 15th, and we are scheduled to start again on December 1st, provided that we host a winter shelter program in Glendale, or if one were to be hosted in the city of Burbank. As part of our status report, we've included the year-end statistics from the last year's program, which was held at the Burbank Armory. We provided a fact sheet that was prepared by Imago, the operator of last year's program, to articulate some of the issues that were raised by residents in the neighborhood around the Burbank shelter last year, and Imago's response to address those concerns that were raised. We also included the Glendale Homeless Coalition's Good Neighbor Policy, which are policies and procedures for behavior by clients that use the shelter, and it also gives the police department a chance to work with the operator and develop lists of persons that we will deny services to if they are causing trouble, and that's our Good Neighbor Policy. Then we've also included, as part of your report, the 2009 homeless count in the city of Glendale, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. As most of you know, we have hosted a winter shelter program in the city of Glendale for 10 years at the Glendale National Guard Armory. 2 years ago, the program was moved to the Burbank National Guard Armory due to construction that was taking place in Glendale, so the Glendale Armory was not available. The first year of operation at Burbank went relatively smoothly. The Winter Shelter Program is administered and funded by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, or better known as LASA. LASA contracted with Imago. Imago is a subsidiary of the Union Rescue Mission to run the Burbank shelter, so they ran the shelter the last 2 years. Last year, it appears that the shelter began to experience problems that it may not have experienced the year before, and there were concerns and issues raised by community members. The city of Burbank was in the middle of conducting community meetings with the residents of Burbank. Those meetings included the representatives from the operator as well as representatives from LASA. In the middle of those meetings, the National Guard Armory informed LASA and the City of Glendale and City of Burbank that the Burbank Armory would not be available for the 9-10 winter shelter season, which would begin on December 1st, and that instead Glendale would be available for a winter shelter program in our area here. One of the features of the Burbank shelter was a transportation component where there were pickup drop-off points, one in Glendale and one in Burbank, and the program was designed to only take in clients that were bused in, although there were some exceptions made for walk-ins for homeless persons that actually had jobs and would get home from their jobs after the shelter doors were Some of the concerns that were raised by Burbank residents last year at the Burbank shelter were that there were too many walk-ins being allowed, and that wasn't the agreement that the operator LASA had with the city. Too many persons were allowed to loiter in and around the shelter, and that there was not adequate screening out of sex offenders was an issue. In terms of who was using the shelter last year, according to the statistics collected by Imago, 21% of those using the shelter identified themselves as being from Glendale, 17% identified as being from Burbank, together totaling 38% of the persons that used the shelter. In addition, 7% indicated they were from Pasadena, and 37% identified themselves as being from Los Angeles. And then the balance, or 18%, identified themselves as coming from other areas. And I would like to point out this statistic is based on self-certification, meaning as intake is conducted, persons are asked what community they identify with, where they stayed last night, what community are they accessing services in, and then depending on their response, they will be identified as either from Glendale or Burbank or another community. The total number of unduplicated persons served last year was 549, which represents a 5% increase over the previous year. And the number of families served last year was 27 compared to 7 the previous year. LASA plans to issue an RFP for the winter shelter program later this month. Imago has indicated that they would plan to submit an application to operate a program at the Glendale Armory, absent any other service providers willing to submit an application for Glendale. We believe that one option we have that we can explore, depending on direction from the Housing Authority, is the feasibility of Glendale and possibly Burbank partnering to try to develop a local winter shelter program using local funds from Burbank and from Glendale, which would allow us to have more control over a local winter shelter program. Of course, we would have to come up with our own funding sources, and the other challenge would be to try to recruit a local service provider to take an interest in operating a locally developed program. We did talk to LASA today, and they have indicated that they would be willing to work with the City of Glendale on such a venture, and they would be willing to work with us and the National Guard in using the Armory for a locally funded program, if that was something that we wanted to look into. In terms of the cost of a LASA-funded, a full-fledged winter shelter program is probably between $250,000 to $325,000 thereabouts. I think a lot depends on whether there's a transportation component or not. We estimate that if we developed a local program, our numbers would probably be closer to the neighborhood of 50 or 60 clients versus the 120, which is the average for a full-fledged winter shelter program. And the cost would probably be in the neighborhood of $75,000 if we were to develop a local winter shelter program serving approximately 50 or 60 clients. We do have a representative from Imago here in the audience if you'd like to ask questions from the last year's operator. We also have represented the chair and the vice chair of the Glendale Homeless Coalition, and they could speak to the thinking of the Glendale Homeless Coalition. Now, as part of this discussion, of course, we do need to recognize that there are impacts to local community anytime you run a winter shelter program, and the police representatives representatives that are here and the fire representatives will tell you that there is an increase in calls for service during the winter shelter season compared to year-round. And they may have some data or anecdotal data that they can share with you to add to this discussion. I would also like to mention that the 2009 homeless count, based on the homeless count, there are approximately 306 homeless persons in the city of Glendale on any given night. The good news is that's only an increase of 10 over the homeless count 2 years ago in 2007. The bad news is that the chronic homeless count has increased from 79 or 27% of the population, the homeless population, to 105 or 34% of the homeless population. With that, we are. This is a good time to get direction from the Housing Authority because it's early enough in the planning cycle that we can have discussions with LASA if we want to try take a different approach to the winter shelter program. Or if you're interested at this time, we can call up representatives from police or fire, and they can speak to the impacts from their departments.
Okay, before we do that,
Last question first.
well, let me just get rid of this one, Mr. Weaver. Herbert Milano. Mr. Milano submitted a card. Mr. Milano is not in. Yes, we will go to
Thank you for doing that first.
Mr. Weaver.
Jess, I understand the very great need for the program. When it gets down 20, below freezing, we have to get as many people off the street as we can. But refresh me, when did this cold shelter program start? And was it just for the Glendale homeless at the time? You said Burbank is busing them in from other communities. So can you give me the genesis of when it started?
Yes, Commissioner Weaver. We have been hosting a winter shelter program at the Glendale Armory for 10 years, including the last 2 years at Burbank. It's been 12 years. And the winter shelter program is fully funded by LASA. The city of Glendale, nor prior to 2 years ago, Burbank provided any funding towards the program. The LASA is responsible for the regional network of homeless shelters, and by state law, armories are mandated to be available for winter shelter programs. Prior to 10 years ago, we had a much smaller scale program that was operated by, I believe, Lutheran Social Services, and that was conducted in the gymnasium of Glendale Presbyterian Church. But that was also funded by LASA, but it was a much smaller scale until 12 years ago.
So it's regional. It's not, never has been just for Glendale homeless.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Quintero.
I'm still not clear what happened at the Burbank Armory. Why isn't the program going to continue there?
Mobilizing.
Yes, Authority Member Quintero, according to the National Guard, Burbank is not available due to deployment activities for the war in Iraq.
All right. And then I have another question. I noticed in the 2009 homeless count, that final report, in 2007 we counted 114 veterans. In 2009, only 22 veterans. Wondering if one of the staff or someone can comment on that. That's a tremendous drop in the amount of veterans being serviced.
Yes, Authority Member Quintero, I could ask Yvette Samueli, and Yvette is our homeless coordinator. She's a senior administrative analyst in our department. And Yvette, do you have any idea what?
Housing Authority Quintero, members of the Housing Authority. In 2007, we conducted the count and we utilized the homeless management information systems, which clients are accessing services in the Glendale Continuum of Care, and they certified as being veterans. In 2009, we actually conducted the survey and asked the clients without using the HMI system, and they also self-certified as being veterans. There's basically no information as to why the significant drop of the veteran population in terms of our service providers seeing homeless veterans.
Well, I'd like to get a little more information on that, either checking with the job center or trying to figure out what that's about, because my feeling is there's probably going to be more, or are more, not going to be, there are more homeless veterans, including some of the issues with veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. That's too large a drop to 114 in 2007 and only 22 2009. I'd like to get some more information on that.
Housing Authority member Quintero. We'll also try to do a comparison with other continuums and other surveys to see how it compares with theirs.
Okay, I would like to hear, invite Captain Nicolason up. There were some concerns addressed or raised by the Burbank Winter Shelter Program fact sheet, as well as your experience, because we've had the shelter and then it's been moved for 2 years. What sort of impacts do you think it has on the community?
Mr. Chair and members of the authority, I think I've been involved in the operating of all of the various forms of the shelters in the pickup and drop-off since it's been in Burbank, the smaller scale shelters, and then the ones that have been run through LASA at the Armory since the beginning. Basically, the problem for Glendale is twofold. One, nobody on the police department or otherwise wants to see people freeze to death. Hypothermia prevention is a real need, and there's a real need for a shelter like this. For Glendale, the problem is the proximity of the Armory to the Central Business District and the Central Library. The mix of using the Armory as a cold weather shelter, where basically there is none of the continuum of care aspects of it that are present in Path Achieve, brings chronic homeless, which in those numbers can be persons suffering from mental health problems, drug and alcohol abusers, and criminals, right into the downtown area of Glendale and right in the proximity of the Adult Recreation Center and the Central Library. Calls for service, we studied this extensively probably 9 or 10 years ago. I recall Council Member Sheldon Baker, I think, sitting in your very chair. Council had in a majority acknowledged the problematic location of the Armory, and Council Member Baker said, we don't have any alternatives. This will allow it to continue one more year, but it will not continue in this location. And in fact, it has, because we just haven't been able to identify any good alternatives to this location. But every year, our library, the Adult Recreation Center, and the businesses in the Central Business District are negatively affected by the homeless population that increases during that time of the year. Shelter closes at 7 in the morning. Everyone goes out onto the streets and dissipates to various areas and comes back at night. The same thing with the pickup and drop-off. We suggested that the pickup and drop-off might be better located near Path Achieve rather than in the Central Business District. However, that's where the pickup and drop-off has been as well. The same complications over time.
Well, just so I'm clear, the drop-off is at the Armory,
yes,
because that's where they're staying. So how could you have the drop-off at Path Achieve?
Oh no! While they've been in Burbank the last 2 years, the pickup and drop-off could have been located anywhere in Glendale.
That was the Glendale
yes,
location for.
There's also, if I could add one thing, this is a regional problem, and just as police departments communicate informally, regionally, the same thing happens with shelters, and so people become aware where there are services and beds available. So you can see by our own counts from the latest years that the minority of the persons using the shelter in Glendale are self-declaring as being from Glendale. These have a regional draw. So it's my observation that during the times that this shelter operates, there is a magnetic effect to these shelters, that people come into Glendale that otherwise wouldn't be here.
And the Armory, is mandated by law to house the cold weather shelters. That aside, you're talking about the downtown business district and the library and the adult recreation center. If you could point to a better location in the city, assuming there's land and space and care providers, is there a better location in the city?
Well, I think that search has been problematic in the past. It's been difficult, if not impossible, to locate another site in the city of Glendale that works well. There was even some discussion, Mr. Duran can attest to this, of coming up with a program of moving Path Achieved to another location and using the Path Achieved site for a First Step Housing and First Step Drug Rehab Center that would be operated jointly with Pasadena. Now, Pasadena's homeless census far exceeds Glendale, so naturally, from the police perspective, we weren't thrilled with that idea. But moving this type of a shelter to that location would be preferable than having it in the central business district. So I don't think any neighborhood would enjoy, this is a NIMBY issue, obviously, no neighborhood would enjoy having a cold weather shelter in their neighborhood. But I believe that because of its proximity to the central library, where many kids spend their afternoon hours in the library, having these 3 months or so of cold weather shelter, magnetic effect, population drawn into those areas daily is problematic from a police perspective.
Okay, questions? Mr. Weaver, then Mr. Mincy.
I presume then that we could expect an increase in activity at the Americana block away.
I suppose so. The Americana is the way that it's set up. I think it's set up very well in terms of having its points of access fairly well controlled, and they have a very active security staff that works there. So I think that is a factor that comes into play that can minimize that.
So
However,
you'd have
it's
to be
certainly a
working with
possibility.
them.
I'm sorry?
You'd have to be working with
Yes.
them to see what was moving towards them
Yes.
during that time.
Mr. Mincy?
On the last year we had it at the Armory, I know the library had a security person that was added. I believe that did help for that area. Anyway. Did that help in your opinion?
The public buildings are somewhat problematic in that they're public buildings. People, even if you're homeless, you're entitled to come in and enjoy the library. You can enjoy the restroom in the library. They've had a problem, however, with certain behaviors occurring in the library. So the library developed a code of conduct, basically, rules and regulations. Somewhat problematic to enforce because they don't have, in and of themselves, force of law. But persons can be warned and advised, and repeated violations can amount to an arrest if push came to shove. But yes, vigilance on the part of the library helps quite a bit. Enforcing the rules and regulation by their staff, and the library is not really set up to be enforcers. They're not of that mindset typically. People don't go into library to enforce rules. They go in to promote reading and enrichment of the public. But enforcing the rules and regulations does help quite a bit. Having a security person there does help. The smoking ordinance helps in that seating area outside. No longer can persons smoke in that area, and that's caused people that want to smoke to move a little farther away from the library. So there is also that improvement that has helped somewhat. But nonetheless, you just have more of the chronic homeless that can contain those individuals that I've already described in the proximity daily. That's part of the NIMBY issue with having the Armory used as the cold weather shelter.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Captain? Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Duran.
Mr. Weaver.
We talked about that we might have to input some money for this, $75,000. I mean, or is that a consideration for us?
If Housing Authority member Weaver, if the city of Glendale is interested in developing its own local program outside of the LASA system, right?
Outside, okay.
Then we would have to bear the cost. If we continue to work within the LASA system, what LASA will do is they're issuing an RFP later this month. They will receive proposals from service providers throughout the area, and Imago will be one. Imago has indicated that they will submit an application to run a program at the Glendale Armory, and if LASA accepts their application, then Imago would work with the Glendale Homeless Coalition and adopt and follow our good neighbor policy and work with our city attorney's office and our police department to the degree that we can to try to mitigate the impacts of hosting a winter shelter program. So if we don't do anything, there will be an application submitted for the Glendale Armory, which might be okay. But as an alternative, we could consider the feasibility of doing something more local and more controlled.
And we will have no trouble with the National Guard mobilizing or troops coming home in Glendale?
As of this moment, the State National Guard has indicated that the Glendale Armory will be available for a winter shelter program. Now, I do need to qualify that. Typically and historically, on average, there's about 1 weekend a month where the armories are closed for training activities. And during that time, typically service providers scurry around and they find someone to host it for 1 or 2 nights out of that month.
Okay. Thank you. What are we here to do? I see it says receive the report and provide direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I get some inkling of the direction the authority wants to go?
I don't see how we can't. You can't, as Nicolaisen said, you can't let people freeze to death on the streets. We have to do something. I'm not for establishing our own, putting our own money in. We're going around cutting budgets all the time now. I don't like to spin off because I've been sitting here when those reports have come in about the library, so on, and I'm sure the force down at the Americana, security force there, will be able to control it along with our police. I guess we just have to be more vigilant during that time. So it's the nature of the thing, and with more people unemployed, now you may have more in the shelters now. How many more homeless are on the streets now that you haven't forecasted? I don't know how many families will try to get in, women with children. You just can't turn your back on it. So I guess you got to weight the positives and the negatives of it and err on the side of human life and so on. So I guess you got to give direction to go ahead and do it.
Mr. Quintero.
The shelter's been there for years, and the PD and library staff has worked through most of the issues. So I'm comfortable with with it being used again. And I did find it interesting that in Burbank it did become a big political football, et cetera, yet we've been housing homeless here for at least 10 years that I can remember. So I think we'll be able to handle it just fine.
I have a question. Given that last year 26% of the clients were being bussed in from Los Angeles or from Los Angeles, what happens if the homeless population in Glendale rises and they're still coming in from Los Angeles? Does that mean that there might be a situation where we can't accommodate our own homeless population in our shelter?
Yes,
Or
Authority
is
member.
there some kind of priority that's set up?
Yes, Authority Member Friedman, we would work with the operator to give preference to Glendale residents. Then what the operator would have to do is they would have to make arrangements to bus the overflow to another shelter. One advantage of working with Imago is that they will probably receive more than a contract for more than one shelter. So when there's overflow, they can transfer the overflow to another shelter. For example, last year you ran Culver City and Inglewood? Okay. So in working with the Glendale Homeless Coalition Winter Shelter Subcommittee, we would monitor that they give preference to Glendale residents, and then you'll overflow from outside of Glendale be taken to other shelters.
I would want to just be sure of that, especially if we're talking about people that are working, and
Right.
so that they're not completely displaced from people that they know in a familiar environment.
Roughly what percentage would you say were homeless staying in the shelter that actually had jobs and came in?
Authority members Carrie Gatlin Siqueiros with the Union Rescue Mission in Imago, the operator last year. I would say that it was probably about 30% last year, which was part of our problem with the neighbors. We hadn't had a problem the year before because we didn't have a lot of people walking in. Last year, the number of working poor, people that were trying to hold on to their jobs but had lost their housing, increased dramatically. So I would say our last estimate, and my best guess, would be about 30%, which is very, very high in our population, by the way. And we're seeing that increase even more this year, unfortunately.
And let me ask a question. So the shelter's only open during a temperature of 40 or 50 or something?
No. Typically, the winter shelter program runs from December 1 to March 15th. They don't shut it down during that 3.5-month period based on weather, because there are fixed costs and logistics and staffing and things associated with that. So it's left open during that 3.5-month period every day.
And in terms of the facilities that you're actually using, what is it that you require to operate the shelter?
Showers, restrooms, and a sufficient ratio, obviously, for the numbers of people that we're serving. A kitchen facility is not necessary because we typically transport all of our meals in from our downtown shelter, where we subcontract the meals out. And it's really the ideal situation. The armories are a great situation for an operator because it's one large room. There's not a lot of hidden corners and smaller rooms that you have to monitor, and so it's really a good situation from that respect, but it's also logistically a real challenge because we have to break everything down every morning and set everything up every night. So, which is why nobody will apply for these RFPs. At the Armory, there are 4 Armory locations throughout the county, and year before last, when we took over 3 of them, it was at the request of our council, Los Angeles City Council member, because nobody wanted to operate them. So they're very difficult to operate.
I'm familiar with Path Achieve in Glendale. How are you different from them?
We're not. We're a lot alike. In fact, Path Achieve is a very good partner of ours. They subcontracted with us last year. And one of the reasons why is we wanted to be sure that the people that were from this community, or this region, I should say, which Burbank, Glendale, North Hollywood, the region that these guests are coming from, are served by those case managers at Path Achieve on a daily basis. Now, we have programs all over the county, but these are the people that they know and they work with, and there's a continuum of care for them. The disadvantage to the winter shelter programs is that once our staff are out of there at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, people disperse and they still need services, and so we have to partner with local agencies that will serve them beyond what we can, the shelter and food and care that we can provide them.
So would there be any benefit to locating you close to Path Achieve or adjacent?
Absolutely, but as I think your police chief pointed out, that's been a challenge, I think, in the past. And we would be, as the operator, our goal is to come in and assist the community in any way we can. It is a regional problem, obviously. We don't do it because we make any money off of it. It's a very challenging, it's the most challenging program I've ever operated in my 18-year career. But we do it because it's part of our mission. But it is, we come in to assist the community. So it's really your decision as far as where that placement happens and how the program operates.
I mean, I know, I'm sorry to talk so much, but I know Path Achieve is currently, as every organization, challenged for funding. Mm-hmm. Would there be any benefit to your organization working intimately with Path Achieve and the funding, more or less coming under one umbrella?
We have agreed. Natalie Profant-Kimura is here she's the executive director of Path Achieve. She and I have worked together for years. She used to be with LASA, and she has already given me a budget and a subcontractor. We've already have a informal subcontractor agreement for this season to do the same thing.
You're there and they're here, and would it not be better if you were working together?
Absolutely. If
the space is available.
If the space were available, yes, and that's the challenge, I think.
Yes.
On that, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that given the regulations that govern the use of the armories, that if all of a sudden you had a building next to Path Achieve, you'd fill that building up and you'd fill up the armory. I mean, it sounds like there's that kind of a need.
Hi, I'm Natalie Profant-Kimura with Path Achieve Glendale. Let me just speak to your point first of all. One of the things that I do want to caution against is the winter shelter program is a low-demand program, which means that they don't have the stringent kind of requirements that we have in our emergency housing program. And one of the reasons we have those more stringent criteria is that we have families with children who come into our facility. So one of our interests would be to have a little bit of distance between a program site for winter shelter and the program site that we operate at Path Achieve. And frankly, our board members have been looking around for other sites as well since our own lease is up June 30th, 2010. But that's just one other consideration that we have because we are serving families in the same space as single adults, which is not a typical operating procedure. And then your point was that
Just, it sounds like there's so much need, or there might be so much need that even if we were to have another building for this, given that we can't restrict the use of the armory, then we're sort of inviting two shelters, it sounds like. And maybe we need that, but...
Well, one of the things I want to bring up about the Burbank numbers is that there were people in Glendale who would not get on the bus to go to Burbank. So that there's actually more people represented in Glendale who would probably use a winter shelter program in Glendale than they would in Burbank. So that's one thing to keep in mind. In terms of overflow, I think we're going to see a lot more people living in cars and mobile homes, they call mobile homeless. We've had a few already who will not leave their vehicle. They'll come in for services, but they won't leave their vehicle to stay inside. So I think we'll see more of that. The economy is still, it feels to some degree that it's in free fall, and we don't know where this is going to end. So by winter, that could be true. The other consideration is, and the reason we're so grateful to Imago for stepping in because they are so large, is that when the Armory shuts down on those weekends for special operations, they've got to find 150 beds someplace else. And that's something really pretty beyond us at Path Achieve. And so we do appreciate them doing that. We're very happy to have the outreach team work closely with them, and we shift our morning hours to open up earlier during the winter months. So we're up at 7 to do case management services for the people in the winter shelter program, so they can immediately come over and start getting their services in our access center. So we work very well with them.
Mr. Mincy.
I know that Path Achieve does a lot for housing for women and children. As I recall in visiting the Army, I think it was men only, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I meant to ask this question when you were still up here.
That's okay.
But
I'm close. The winter shelter programs are for single individuals only. Families are always, and this is across all of the 13 or 14 winter shelter programs countywide, they're always vouchered to hotels. We don't allow any children. Because of the transient nature and as Natalie expressed, this is a high-tolerance facility, low demand for service requirements for people. It's not your typical program.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Mr. Weaver.
I don't know the answer to this, but forget my comment about more homeless families since children and mothers aren't in there.
Well, I will just tell you this. We have seen in our programs, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Union Rescue Mission is one of the largest the largest provider for families, homeless families in the county of Los Angeles. And we opened our Hope Gardens Family Center out in Sylmar last year. We have seen in the last 12 months a 600% increase in the numbers of homeless families we're serving.
On my comment, I don't know who can answer it. This is middle of June almost. It's down in the 60s and overcast. According to what I've read, a full-fledged El Nino is developing out in the Pacific, which means colder weather, rainy weather, whatever. What do we do if you approach November, the temperatures are down at freezing, and it's pouring rain? Do we open the winter shelter earlier? And who handles that? If it's done, or do we just turn our face away from it?
Well, as you can imagine, the opening the winter shelter programs are quite the event. In fact, I say that the Armory programs are like setting up a special event every day. So hiring staff, getting staff trained, and setting up the storage units and purchasing the linens and the cots and all of that goes into that program is pretty much a nightmare. There's really no way, unless you get out pretty far ahead of it, that you're going to open up early.
If you saw a pattern, a weather pattern developing,
that would be losses, Paul.
That November is going to be below normal in terms of weather and more rain.
Well,
I guess you could work arrangements, possibly to open it earlier. I understand what you mean, a special event, putting all that together. But that's the only way you could handle it, right? You couldn't do it on a one-night basis or 2 nights.
Yeah. Commissioner Weaver, I would love to say that could happen, and I believe all things are possible, but it's an issue of funding for LASA, and LASA would have to respond to that, obviously, because that would be their call. As the operator, if LASA said we're going to be able to provide, or City of Glendale or City of Burbank, or somebody's going to be able to provide the additional funding to operate for that month, we would be happy to do it. We've scrambled around in 2 weeks and got the program up and running 2 years ago. So from our perspective, we would do that, but that would be a lot to coordinate.
Mr. Duran, is the housing set-aside funds available for purchase of property to be used as a homeless facility? I mean, we just had $2.5 million for 5 families for Habitat. Clearly, I think we're hearing there's a large need. Path Achieve isn't always looking for funds. And maybe that's some direction that I'd like to give or ask staff to look into. What are some possible long-term solutions rather than this in-and-out, set-up, breakdown every night at the Armory? That's something that we could possibly combine with Path Achieve, because I think you're losing your lease, aren't you?
Yes.
You are losing your lease.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Najarian, and the operative word is combining programs. The reason the Armory works so well is because during the day it doesn't have to be used for anything, or it's used in an Armory, and then at night it could switch gears and turn into a cold weather shelter. One of the difficulties we had in trying to locate, over the years, in trying to locate a different location and develop something from scratch for winter shelter use is what you do with it the rest of the time. Winter shelter is 3 months out of the year. So what do you do with it the other 9 months to meet your costs? I don't know if set-aside funds would be eligible for a winter shelter program. Typically, to be eligible, set-aside funds we have to demonstrate that it's permanent housing. CDBG funds could be used towards the development of a winter shelter program, and possibly ESG funds, but we'd have to put together a lot of those funds to make this.
Well, we're here to give direction, and that's just an idea that I'd like staff to come back with and flesh out a little bit, and anyone else.
If it's sitting vacant during the day and whatever, it's a big open room.
Yeah.
Can it be handled for recreational basketball courts, etc.?
Yeah, it would have to be something like that. And we could Obviously, we work very closly with PATH as they pursue options for their emergency shelter and access center. We could continue to keep in mind that maybe there's an opportunity there to combine that with a seasonal winter shelter operation.
Mr. Draymond.
In speaking with some of the folks from Path Achieve recently, within the last week, as a matter of fact, it seems that perhaps because they're losing their lease, there might be an interest in purchasing a property. If that's the case, perhaps in the long run there is some financial benefit to the city assisting in that purchase, with the idea that except for that quarter, that one quarter, that it is Path Achieve, and it is during that one winter quarter is a homeless shelter, and the city's participation is that homeless shelter. I don't know if that would work, but I think one of the other things I wanted to get at is the purpose of Path Achieve is very different anyway from a winter shelter. Obviously, a winter shelter is getting people off the street and at a time of the year when we're likely to have inclement weather that could be a problem for someone who would otherwise be out on the street. Path Achieve is not just warehousing people because of weather. They have a particular program. It is not, strictly speaking, just a homeless shelter. They do a tremendous amount of training, retraining, networking on behalf of people, providing services, reteaching, and so on. And it's almost, as I've been listening to all this, it's almost a little bit apples and oranges, or two different varieties of apples or something. We're talking about it as though it's interchangeably the same, and it's just not. And I think that's what you're hearing when you're hearing they work closely together and they work intimately together, but they're not the same program. Anyway, I would certainly be interested in asking staff to sit down with the board at Path Achieve and find out what their needs and goals are in terms of finding a new location that in turn could serve as a winter shelter. And maybe there's some participation from the city as well, instead of continually turning to Armory, who has the Armory this year. And sometimes it's under construction, but when you look at it after it's been under construction, you wonder what in the name of what's been going on there, because it still looks really dilapidated. In any case, rather than just keep playing this routine over and over and over and over, perhaps that's the way to go, or at least to explore that.
I think that's
what you were alluding to earlier.
Worthy of investigating. So we're here to approve the report and to provide any other additional direction. If there's not, there's no other direction that they'd like to throw in, we'll take a motion.
We'll take 6B1. Second. I think they've got the direction.
With the direction that's articulated both by agency or a housing authority member Najarian and Raymond. I didn't hear any
and
objection.
Anyone else's good ideas.
Just anything you heard.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Chairman Najarian, does that direction include continuing to explore a locally funded program?
No.
As another option?
That obligates us into funding category. 75,000, you said, possibly.
The more information we can get on the options, the better. I mean, give us as much as you can give us so we can make a more informed decision. If that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Authority members: Draymond.
Yes.
Friedman.
Yes.
Mincy.
Yes.
Brazian.
Yes.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Chairman Najarian.
Yes. Another item. This is a long meeting. 6C.
6C is Interim Acting Director of Community Development and Housing regarding Hamilton Court Family Transitional Housing Program. But C1 is a motion approving Door of Hope as the new project sponsor and authorizing the executive director to execute all necessary documents to complete the transition of the project from the City of Glendale to Door of Hope.
Okay, Mr. McFall.
Once again, Mr. Duran.
Thank you, Bob. Chairman Najarian, members of the Housing Authority, previously we reported on the status of the Hamilton Court Family Transitional Housing Program, and we reported that for 10 years the Transitional Housing Program was operated by the YWCA of Glendale. And in November of 2008, the YWCA discontinued operation of the program due to financial hardships. In order to ensure that the funding was not recaptured and the units lost to HUD, the city assumed sponsorship of the program. We came to you in March and received authorization from the Housing Authority to issue an RFP to identify a new qualified, experienced service provider to take over the program. We completed the RFP. We only received one proposal. That was submitted by an organization called Door of Hope out of Pasadena. A proposal review committee evaluated the proposal and interviewed the officers of Door of Hope and determined that Door of Hope was indeed experienced, qualified, and possessed the capacity to assume the program from the city. So we are here today to request final approval from the Housing Authority to transfer the program to Door of Hope. We do have Mr. Tim Peters, the Executive Director, available to answer any questions you might have regarding their proposal or their program, and also Yvette Sanvalian on any details you might have about the RFP process.
Okay. They're experienced, they're ready, they're excited to take over the program. Any questions? Door of Hope.
I think that's such a great name, Door of Hope.
Door of Hope.
Great
Yes.
name.
Okay, if there's Mr. Weaver.
There's no questions. Happy to have them aboard. I'll move 6C1.
Second.
Okay, if there's no other comments, roll call, please.
Authority members: Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Mincy,
Yes.
Grazian, Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Najarian.
Yes. Thank you. Next item.
Any authority member or staff comments?
Comments? Okay.
We adjourn.
Second.
Second, the authority is adjourned.